Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another one of those Future of the Fortress videos where I talk about and read the Future of the Fortress posts that Tarn Adams does once a month on the Bay 12 forums. If you want to find those, you can find the link to the actual forum post down in the description of this video, and you can go read them yourself. There's a few very technical ones in there that I'm not including in this video because, quite frankly, I don't understand a word of it, nor do I understand how to pronounce those words, so you can go read those yourself if you like. Of course, if you make an account on the Bay 12 forums, you can take part in these conversations and maybe get your comment read on this. Or not, if it's too technical. Anyway, let's dive in, see what people have to ask the Toad this month. First question comes in from Armok GOB, and they say, is there any plans to add giant desert scorpions back in? Question mark? And Tarn's response is pretty simple. Giant bark scorpions live in the desert, though it doesn't seem to satisfy people. I'm not sure which desert species people like. Quite frankly, I myself am in the same boat. I've had to fight with giant bark scorpions specifically in the desert a couple of times. I also don't know what people are talking about. Does anybody have any, insight down below? Unless this person's playing on an older version. I'm confused by that one. So this question comes in from Rax, and they say, how are big enemies going to be represented in the visually in the Steam version? I can answer this question in a second. And has there been any thought to the visualization of damage and fights once the dwarf and the enemy are on adjacent tiles? What will we see and hear? So the first question I can answer before I bring in Tarn's answer for the second one, which is they will not be multi-tile. However, the sprites themselves will take up more than one tile, so they will have a visual appearance of being larger, even though they're still only taking up one tile. Now on to Tarn's response for the question. And he says, we have more graphical blood and upcoming corpses and chunks. And we have some effect animation for strikes on the recipients of attacks yet to test. We can't really animate the attacking creatures themselves easily. There are lots and lots of creatures, and we need to finish the procedural ones before we can consider going back and adding any frames. The music and sound question is complicated, and we'll have to continue updating as we go on with that. The next question comes in from Gototototo, and they say, would it be possible to change the layer of fog in the caverns to a darker hue? The reason light works like this outside IRL is because the sky is blue, but underground, this wouldn't be the case, meaning now the caves feel very outside instead of something that is supposedly very deep underground. Tarn's response is, we're in a few places on this. We like the outside blue, and we want to see if it can be merged with a different color inside. It is unclear whether this will work. If it doesn't, we may change it. In either case, either one of the two plus colors will be editable. So, regardless of whether or not they're able to make a darker hue underground, if you don't like the lighter hue, you can make it darker yourself in the options menu. Currently, you can actually do that in the init files, but you'll be able to do that from within game, hopefully, question mark. So, that would mean that it'll be a fixable solution if you find the underground colors a bit too light, shall we say. All right, this next one's kind of long, so if you don't like my reading, I don't know, shut up, basically. This one comes in from Mr_Crabman, and they have 5 rapid-fire questions, which we're going to roll through pretty quickly. And the first one is, assuming it's still not clear whether Linux and Mac support will be possible with the Steam release, at what point/milestone in development would this be investigated? 2. Obviously, this depends on player feedback, but after the initial Steam release and itch.io release, which they forgot to list here, and fixing any major problems that may arise, would there be a second/small UI pass made and/or enhancement of modding capabilities and framework? Or is it just immediately onto resuming the villain stuff? 3. Can you say roughly what sort of priority and frequency future updates to modding and workshop capabilities or UI enhancements or even graphical and such as smooth movement between tiles for instance, not existence, would rather have after the initial release in general, contingent on player feedback, of course. 4th, what screens/menus remain to be done in Fortress mode? With the military stuff done by the time you read/respond to this, I think that it's the Civ screen and whatever is left to do in the info hub. But what is left in the info hub? And is there anything else outside of info hub and Civ screen? The way Crabman writes is kind of complicated. Just bear with me here. And number 5 is the info presented in the top bar final. For instance, I think somewhere there was something a while back about whether or not it might mislead players about needing to keep the entire fort fully active at all times by showing the number of idlers. And on wider screens, there's quite a bit of unused space. Granted, some of it should be reserved for future updates. I think when fort mode and the lead up from the title screen through world generation to embark, the fort is nearing completion. We're going to see where we are at the end, where we are at with other OSs with the classic conversion. Steam Workshop and Achievements, Legends, Adventure, and Arena, we need to head towards the minimum viable release before we can spend any serious time on anything else. It is hard to have these discussions with all the involved parties until I have more of an idea when I'm done with the fort stuff. We're much closer now anyway. Military felt like a big step. 2 plus 3. It's impossible to say right now. Everything depends on how the release goes. 4. Minecart hauling stuff and several on the view sheets. And some pressure plate stuff. The Civ screen and info screen tabs, whichever ones they're keeping, they are still in flux as we go. And certainly the justice stuff needs to be done. Diplomacy and petitions needs to be done. And the new notion of alerts. Smaller stuff like hotkeys for recentering, follow cam, and so forth. Tutorialization we are going to do, and the save load restructuring, including how mods and etc. get loaded, etc. And of course, there's doing the map part for the embark as well, if you count that towards Fortress mode. 5. No, it's not. Idlers is gone in the latest videos, if I recollect. This is true, I can confirm. And the main idea on the table was just to make it customizable, since people are interested in different things, sometimes at different times in the fortress. We can add this to the list of question 4, along with settings generally. This quote comes in from Buttery Mess, and they say, I see there have been changes to workshops and menus and jobs. I've seen the graphical representations of these changes, but for most of them, I haven't seen the corresponding ASCII versions. And if I choose to use the ASCII version, will I be able to identify everything immediately, or will things be unfamiliar? 2. How well does the information fit into the ASCII screen? And how will it look at smaller than 1920 by 1080 resolution, or resize windows? 3. I've seen how lower layers look in the graphical version. Will there be similar effects in the ASCII version? 4. How wed are you to the ANSI colors? Will you move to a broader color palette in the ASCII version at any point? 5. Are you working in ASCII first and then moving to graphics? Or are you working with graphics and then going back to ASCII? Lastly, how do floaty menus work in ASCII? Do they snap to the grid, or are they unaligned with the background graphics? And Tarn's response is, there is lots of menu changes. The new military screen we've been showing, for instance, is quite different and will look basically that way in ASCII. My dwarf computer is 1366 by 768, and things work there. And Windows, at Windows is somewhat smaller than that. But it's difficult to preserve things all the way down to 80 by 25 console sizes, or even close to that. And there need to be an extra push to attain that level of smallness. The main tie between me and the 16 colors, which even persists in the graphical text, is just the sheer number of color calls and changes in the old version. But we're technically decoupled from that now, but both color and glyph count dependencies, as Particle Lendell says. Some of the ASCII issues we've had with a white G being a zillion things can be handled now in whichever way we'd like. The most popular, perhaps, being the addition of 1 to 2 extra glyph sheets for purists. I'm not sure. A Moria-style Q quadruped system might be required, and it would still just be totally confusing. None of the menus are currently floaty. However, a click and drag style with this is possible at some point, even if they'd align with the ASCII grid. Okay, this is just a note from me. Yes, please, floating menus align with the ASCII grid. That'd be cool. And also 2 more glyph sheets and extra colors. Okay, thanks. So now we have 5 back-to-back questions from Jurist McSaddist, and they say, 1. Will mythologies and magic systems be customizable? And if that's the case, will they be exportable? 2. Are there ever going to be procedural weapons? 3. Are cage traps and drawbridges going to get nerfed with the siege improvements? 4. Are guilds and religions going to be expanded upon before the big wait? 5. Are longer weapons like spears ever going to actually have more range? And Tarn's response is, the replies cover the first part, and I haven't thought much about exportability. TLDR, question 1, yes. Currently, if the current XML is any indication, there'd be some form of exporting, and there probably isn't a reason to make it in a format that can't be reincorporated. 2. We have the ones we have now cornered off, but yeah, we'd hoped to do it but for the main cultures at some point. Lots of problems to overcome there. Since we can't just throw the player into a deep muck of randomness without them opting in. 3. Goblins should be able to free their friends from trapped cages. If so, if they can, then the player should be able to lift and drop the cage somehow to keep their prisoner. Should the third goblin go down a hallway where the 2 others have been chopped up by saws? If so, how would they react instead of the maze of traps? How would they deal with an inaccessible fort? It's kind of an arms race thing. The goblins need a ton of nerfs the way things are now, for people that want challenging invasions. But hopefully also we can provide some additional tools. Our main ideas there are to involve stuff like moving fortress bits and other complications, which seem the map rewrite linked. We'll have to see how it plays out. 4. Probably not very much. Things touch upon them in the villains area. For example, I wouldn't rule it out, but the big entity rewrite is later. And then 5, the final question. It's the plan, yeah. When the combat update is out, I'm not sure. We've done reach inside projects, and it adds a lot. But it's never seemed to be time for the combat update in DF. As with several other updates, range and reach is neat, both over multiple tiles, but also just for adjacent fighters that have a situation that are somewhat like wrestling, when somebody with a dagger might as well be within a spear point to their advantage, or held at the point almost completely unable to attack, with both fighters attempting to improve their position while instead of attacking. Another interference nightmare, of course, on top of all of the current combat information, especially keeping it constant with when 3+ fighters are involved. But it's good stuff. So TLDR, hopefully longer spears. I would like spears to have reach, but I kind of see where he's coming from with the ridiculous nature of how you would program it with the way Dwarf Fortress works. Anyway, on to the next question. The next question comes in from Immortal D, and they say, on the subject of tackling the more complicated interfaces for Steam, have you had the chance to look at bins and containers in general? Seeds within bags, within barrels, within stockpiles? Which is, as Immortal D puts it, kind of a complicated subject and a bit of a nightmare. And Tarn's response is, I'm not sure what you are asking specifically here. In terms of problems to be addressed, there are new conveniences from the item sheets. You can zip easily down into containers and then back up, whether or however is holding the object, which wasn't possible before, and barrels and later bins graphically show their general contents a bit now. I think what Immortal D was asking for this question is issues with jobs being canceled because certain items are inaccessible at the bottom of a barrel versus in a bag. For example, if you put food into a barrel, the dwarf will just take the food stuff off the top of the barrel, and the next dwarf will take the food stuff that's on top of the barrel, but you can't take the food stuff that's in the bottom of the barrel. Whereas with bags, they could take any seed out at any time instead of having to take the one out that's on top. Things like that. Just weird Dwarf Fortress things. On to the next question. The next question comes in from Fantastic Dwarf, and they have questions about jewelry and stuff, and they say, would we maybe be seeing some of this equipment screen being designed for military recycled for domestic trinkets, earrings, and etc. on a dwarf's person in the future? 2. Lastly, with the slots assigned in particular, would they manifest with the BP of the creature using some of the existing cues, like hearing token parts required for earrings, i.e. Ettins, who would have 2 helmet slots for 2 independent heads, or if BP was tokened not to, retracting the choice of the slot. That was the last bit of suggestion-y, but I have faith that it might hopefully eliminate the long-standing recessive code artifact that quadruped people, being along the lines of centaurs, wear 2 parts of pants and shoes over their hoofs. Tarn's response is 1. We have a list of their worn, etc. items displayed on the items tab. Do you mean specifically stuff they want to pick up but haven't picked up yet? Doesn't seem that pressing. 2. I haven't changed how assignments work, so any issues with mods and residents are ongoing. And the changes I've made are just in how existing information is displayed, and getting rid of some pointers and doing some other changes to get at the raid issues again. So in regards to that first question, I think what Fantastic Dwarf wants is they want a civilian loadout screen where you could have recommended clothing for specific civilians and maybe even your nobles. But because the way the game works and dwarves, because of the way the game works with dwarves just kind of having freedom of choice of whatever they want, if a dwarf wants to run around half naked with a loincloth on, they can do that. If they want to run around in just socks and a dress, they can do that. If they want to wear their pants backwards and 55 crowns on their head, they will walk slowly, but they can do that. Maybe not 55. But anyway, you kind of get the gist. So because the dwarves have a lot of freedom of movement and freedom of clothing, it would kind of be redundant, in my opinion, for us to get that feature, but I could kind of see why people would want it. Anyway, on to the next question. The next question comes in from Mob B-Star, or Mobstar. I think it's Mobstar. And they say, has it been mentioned before that divine spheres will be customizable to some extent via the Myth, Gen, and Parems editor, Myths and Magic Stuffs? Or does it stop there? Do you intend for spheres to become exposed in the raws? On one hand, they are supposed to be universal concepts that drive their flavor from intersection, but this wouldn't need any raw mods. On the other hand, some settings could benefit from revamping or adding spheres, like the Long Night could split animals between mutants and nanites, and add machine deities. Just to clarify, when they talk about spheres, they mean like the god of X thing, so like the god of mountains, or the god of the sun, or the god of oceans. Tarn's response is, it's sort of similar to custom attributes, which we were also planning, where a world would add some basic metaphysical creature trait, and then knit it into some of the procedural systems. Custom spheres are like that. They could be tied to many systems, but they'd lack some of the fundamentalness of the base notions. And this is okay, since it's still a big step. In your example, the ties feel like they are mostly related to raw defined objects, like machine creatures and items, or however it works. And that's a perfect thing. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if over time our default spheres like animals and fish, etc., become custom spheres, while ones like jealousy or whatever remained base spheres. If we further synthesize emotions and actions, even that could change. But we're only going to get to so much. That ha means it's going to take a long time. And so there's some hope for this overall to get at things that feel hard-coded, even if it's only halfway. Hopefully, it'll be in ways that matter. On to the next question. The final question of the day comes in from Buttery Mess, and they say, when there is a Steam release and a itch.io release, is there going to be an advertising campaign? Seeing ads for Dwarf Fortress would be a ray of sunshine in the darkest timeline. And of course, Tarn's response is, well, it would be amusing, although I'll generally be trusting Kitfox's judgment on the effectiveness of things per dollar spent, etc., which is always changing as the internet evolves and people ignore some types of things and pay attention to others. We may be doing well enough since Clinodev says we've been lucky enough to get attention without pressing too hard for it. I can actually put a little bit of information in here as I have been paid to play video games in the past. What I will say is there are certain types of ads that definitely attract people and bring people, but what you really want is you want a good organic word of mouth, especially from my point of view when it comes to videos and streaming. If there are big people naturally making videos of a thing and naturally streaming it, you kind of don't need to do much because it'll just organically grow. If you're throwing dollars at a thing, you could make people stream it, but if it's a game that people aren't necessarily interested in streaming, you're going to throw a bunch of money at it, you'll have people streaming and making videos of it for a week or two, and then it will just kind of vanish again. I've seen this happen many times with indie games that get heavily promoted through paid advertisements and ad placements for streaming and YouTube videos. They'll pop up for a bit, they'll pay a bunch of money, and then they will shrink off into obscurity. I've also seen this with paid ads on YouTube, for example, and other things. If you're getting that initial kind of interest from audience members and you can tell it's going to organically grow, it might be worth it to throw some monies at some big guns to make that natural cycle happen faster. Otherwise, I think it might actually be in their best interest to just kind of hands off it and let it roll, because I know that there's a lot of interest in the game and it will grow. That being said, that's up to Kitfox. And if you're listening and you want to sponsor a streamer to play your video game, well, I know a guy. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope that everybody who is watching this video is already supporting Bay 12. You can do that over on their Patreon. If you want to take part in these Q&As that Tarn does once a month, there's a link down to the forum thread in the description. I try and give myself until the 5th to get it done. We're cutting it a bit close today as I'm uploading this and editing it on the 5th, but it's been a busy week, okay? And I will do another one next month when Tarn does the next Future of the Fortress post. And thank you very much for watching this video. And if you support this channel in any way, via that comments, likes, subscription, or just simply watching the video, that goes a long way. If you want to support me directly, I have a Patreon, as does everybody. My mom probably has a Patreon at this point. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.